Hi. Discussion of the summary and reflections of the session we just conducted. So we did the first part, the problem tree. So to briefly discuss the results, it was pretty easy to have people participate and identify some of the root causes of our main problem, which we identify as the financial needs of McGill students. The I think the brainstorming portion really helped them to figure out what the main categories of financial needs could be. Um,
Yeah, and in terms of the consequences, we did feel like we had to probe them a little bit more to get out the consequences as they were not as obvious to them, we found. But nevertheless, we did get like a good group of consequences from our participants.
in terms of what we would do different if we were to conduct the same exercise next time, we thought that maybe our own experience as students might have biased our discussion and our results because sometimes we were giving them or pushing them towards giving us certain answers because we wanted maybe more concrete categories, and they, as students who were being surveyed, uh, like would have rather answered with um, the feelings that they experience due to financial stress. And so maybe in some way, some of these categories might have been a bit biased in the wording.
Yeah, but generally the participants I think were very comfortable and gave us very insightful answers. And in terms of our explanation of the whole problem tree diagram, I think it was well explained as they were able to once again give us concrete causes and consequences in terms of their financial needs. So overall, it was a well conducted session. So now we're going to go over to the next group, which was on the ranking and scoring portion. This way.
Oh my god. I think it's not working. So
Well, let's go.
yeah.
Oh.
Good. So
So we did the second assessment, and I think we got a lot of insight in terms of what the students think stresses them more, what's their like biggest problem financing. A really interesting thing that we discovered was that as students, even though tuition is a big part of is a big payment, they were actually more worried about rent and entertainment. Um, and according to their discussion, they said that it was at least tuition, when to pay it and how much it is. While these other factors are more um, variable, so they can change within like a week. Sometimes you have food at home, sometimes you don't, you have to go out, and that stresses them more. Well, entertainment was the second ranked, and according to them, it was because of the social implications that come with it, feeling left out by not being able to go out with their friends, or uh, having that mental break from school.
good. So on what should have been done differently? Uh, Students were moving in space, and there was not so much space, and so that's one of the problem. And also at the end, we should have like ranked on the wall the the cards.
Yeah, so the cards that
But
we set up on the wall make them through the discussion maybe like rank them visually so
Yeah.
that they could have a clear view of
Yeah,
what they
clear
just
view.
did. Yeah.
And have a better discussion after that. Just
Yeah, to have a better idea if they
yeah.
agreed or they disagreed, and yeah, the space. I think we should have turned the table to give them more space to move around.
Yeah.
They were able to move around, of course, but it probably would have been better doing that.
So we had the last tool, which was the seasonal calendar. To start off, we found that a main finding was that the proportion of income spent on different categories was not necessarily correlated with the amount of stress. For example, even though tuition was a big amount that came twice a year, it was an expense that was more predictable, and that way they said that they could better prepare for it, and that didn't increase their stress as much as groceries, which were more unpredictable and had more variation within.
Also, what we found like interesting from this tool is to see how the different expenses vary along the year. From the last tool we knew what were the main source of expense, but now we know like that it varies and that it affects them differently. And I think like it was a good idea to have the calendar at the end because it's kind of like we already had the stress like we kind of had an idea of what are the stress that was generated from the financial needs, and we also knew what were the main source of expenses. So it was a good way to wrap all the information.
Yeah. Also, one of the assumptions that we had made at the beginning was that the amount of money spent, for example, if I spend more money, I will necessarily be feeling more negative about it. But on the contrary, what we found was that depending on the kind of expense, the consequence would be different. So that's what we saw, for example, for health or entertainment, even though the amount of money that they spent could be more or less important, for example, in the summer, it had a positive outcome, and therefore it was a source not as much of stress as something else. So the amount of money is not necessarily bad for them. Yeah.
Maybe
Something that went well.
that I mean like I felt that everyone was being heard and that everyone was giving his or her opinion and and even if some opinions were like different on the general like in a general manner they kind of all agreed on the symbols and on how much to allocate to each source. So
Yeah. On the other
Probably.
hand, a challenge was that, for example, we used the symbol of money for the amount of money they spent, but the absolute amount of money couldn't be compared across the categories. For example, $3 signs was like the most that they allocate. So, for example, in September, $3 signs for tuition and $3 signs for rent. But the amount spent for tuition is more than the amount for rent. So the symbols could only be interpreted relatively within a category rather than across all of them. So that was
Yeah.
something that we didn't consider and that we would do differently next time.
yeah, and if we had more time, maybe have a conclusion and try to see by month overall what are their feelings about like how much they've spent and how stressed they are but by month so to
Yeah.
prepare.
To aggregate all the
Yeah.
categories. Okay. So let's have quickly just a little overall recap and what we think went well, what we liked, what we would do differently.
Maybe we hadn't anticipated the effort we would have to put into the planning of this activity. So definitely, maybe if we had to do this another time, we'd spend more time discussing as a team and being properly ready once the activity has to take place.
I think like in theory we're ready but we
Yeah.
didn't have like we weren't practical in our thinking.
Yeah,
That was the problem.
I think they were more engaging than I would expect them to be.
Yeah.
Like they were actually, no, this is my version of this, and then someone would be like, well, you know what? I live here. It's not the same, but like that comparison and like seeing them discuss about it, I thought that was really interesting.
I think we could also have done more, maybe like ice breaking to like break down the power dynamics, because I think it can be seen in the video where like most of the time, like except when they're moving to put the stickers, there's like there's like
Gap.
there's a gap, there's like a
Yeah.
separation. Maybe that was because of the table, but I think that created like a bit of like a separation between the facilitators and the participants. Although I don't think it was an issue for communication.
Yeah, they were, no, but yeah, they were quite comfortable.
And just one thing we forgot to do at the end was to film their feedback. So we weren't really able to get the participants' experience. So definitely something to think about for next time.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you. I think that's it.
Thank you.